general fund, which is our sort of unrestricted portion of the budget, from about 6.2 to 6.6 billion dollars, which is an increase of 6.1%. This is a big jump. It was a big budget year this year. The year before was also big. These years like this are aberrations, are not the norm. At some point we'll go back to more normal growth. The special funds, we actually increased by 11.6%. Meanwhile, the city's workforce went up by a total of about 2.4% in the budget this year. We'll talk about revenues. These are the major revenue sources, the big ticket ones being property tax, about $2.2 billion. The second biggest one, license, permit fees, and fines, is a collection of different taxes, of the different revenues that departments generate, including the payments that we get from special funds to reimburse the general fund for the services that the general fund provides to the special funds. This is all the other major, this is not all the revenues, these are just the big ones. So utilities tax, business tax, sales tax, transit occupancy tax, which is our hotel tax, power revenue transfer, stock transfer tax, which is our real estate transfer tax, and also parking fines. I showed this chart last time. It's essentially telling you what the growth of our general fund tax revenue has been in amount on this gray line, up to now $5.5 billion. And this is the percentage growth over time. The bars represent the percentage growth year to year. The dotted line is the average growth of about 3%. What you see is that we've been, there's low years and then a handful of good years. A bad year, a handful of good years. This was Great Recession, some terrible years, and then we've had a lot of really strong years, average, above average, or very close to average for the last 8 or 9 years. I would like to point out that this is unusual. If you look back to the last 20 years, we've usually had about 5 years of growth before something has turned slightly down. Maybe not negative, but even a year like this is a hard year. A year like this would be a hard year. So, whereas we project average revenues, it's very possible that at some point we would expect, just looking at this trend, that at some point the revenues we're gonna have a bad year coming up. Maybe this year, maybe next year. Who knows? I don't know. But at some point it's gonna happen. So this slide basically identifies the major changes in this year's budget, where the revenues came from. The major revenue changes, the biggest dollar change was property tax at $154 million increase. This is 6% growth. It's not huge percentage growth for property tax, actually. It's a good year, but just the property tax amount is so big that sort of even slightly above average growth triggers a lot of increased revenues for us. And then we also generated almost $100 million in license, permit fees, and fines. Some of this stuff is for reimbursements, like from MTA for services that the police department provides for them, policing on the metro lines. Also, it's from those related cost reimbursements that I just talked about, the special fund paying back the general fund. We're continuing to see a downward slope in the communications users tax. This is as people are cutting the cord and no longer using their same cable services that they had before. Electric users tax, sales tax, business tax have grown at sort of average amounts. Business tax is a big bump, mostly from cannabis. It's a new revenue source, and so cannabis is representing most of that growth is really from the cannabis tax, although a big portion of that, or a portion of that is one time. Transient occupancy tax, this is somewhat flat. The growth is really caused by the short-term rentals and then some slowdown and the lesser growth of hotels, which has tended to be the bulk of the growth. I would note that because there was a new home sharing policy that went into effect for next year, we actually we projected slower growth in short-term rental revenues for tax, because we expect there won't be the same level of short-term rentals this year as there have been as it's grown over the past several years. Dock transfer tax, it's flat. This is I called this last week a canary in the coal mine. This is really the first tax that begins to crash when the economy begins to crash. This is when the housing market goes down. This revenue is generated both by the number of sales that we have in the housing market and also the price of those sales. So usually if it goes down, they often go down together, and then you have a sort of precipitous, dramatic drop. This is a very volatile revenue source, and it tends to be the first one that indicates that the recession is coming. decline. So some of the concerns that we have about revenues for this year, caveats, is that, for both cannabis and also for short-term rentals, because these are really being caused by new policies, by the new sales of cannabis, the new short-term rental policy, there's a lot of uncertainty with these estimates. We did our best job, but because made our best estimates, but because these industries are a little bit uncertain, the revenues also, our estimates are also, we're gonna have to watch them carefully. And of course, gas tax, which is a special tax, a special fund, not a general fund tax, it was short last year, and we have a hard time making those revenue estimates. So it's always unpredictable. On the expenditure side, where I said that the general fund is about $6.6 billion, that's unrestricted. If you narrow that down a little further to truly unrestricted funds, because part of the general fund revenue actually is for fees, and those funds have to go back to pay for the services that those fees are generating. We have about $5.3 billion in truly unrestricted funds that the council mayor can appropriate. If you want to know where those funds go, about 70% of them go to police and fire, and the remaining 30 go to everything else in the city. This is important because in a situation where we have a drop in revenues, where we lose some of our revenues and the budget has to be cut, unless you want to cut police and fire, you're going to have to make dramatic cuts to the other 30% of the budget. So this is always everybody's priority. Everybody always says don't touch police and fire, but if we actually lose revenue, we're down 2 or 3%, to expect 30% of the budget to carry the bulk of all those cuts, you actually can really hamstring those services. So just know that. So the key investments we made this year, obviously homelessness continues to be a major investment, especially with the HHH program taking off. That's our affordable housing bond program that the voters approved. We continue to make investments in infrastructure. Largely, it's really driven by some of the new special funds that have been established, including Measure M, which is for street infrastructure, and money was put towards alleys and sidewalks. There's some increases there, and also for Measure W, which is just approved by voters, and this will be the first full year of that program. We're expecting about $43 million to improve stormwater projects. Of course, we continue to make an investment in public safety. The main bulk of the funding went to $47 million to police overtime increases. This was actually just right-sizing the budget. In 18-19, we had major deficits for the police department and their overtime accounts, so we increased it to reflect the actual need that we expect the police is going to have, so we don't have that similar problem this year, we hope. And then I talked about how expenditure, the major driver of workforce services, are the most important part of the reason that we spend money. The major driver of cities' costs really comes from employer-related costs. This just indicates the number of people that are employed by the city. And here we point out that before the recession, we had about 37,000 employees. Now we're at about 34,000 employees. It's beginning to creep up after the big drop down, about 14%. Now we're at 8% below that peak. Obviously, 8% fewer people, it's a little bit harder to provide the same service that people maybe we're used to unless we find other efficiencies or productivity increases. So just to note that employees are driving the costs of expenditures, and we're still below our maximum levels. In addition to obviously the salaries for employees, the big thing everybody talks a lot about is pension costs. The city's pensions, the costs, the amount we pay is based on the need to fully fund the pension system. We do fully fund the required payment based on what the independent third-party actuary indicates that the city should pay. And it's based on the return they're getting on their investments. It's based on the amount of money it costs to pay the retired employees. It's the amount of money that's being paid in by employees. It's also taken into account. All these things are wrapped up into the annual contribution that we make. How do we control pension costs? Basically, your choices are to keep the cost of employees down, or reduce the control or reduce employee salaries. And also, if you can't do that, just don't hire as many employees. Because really the main driver that it is under the control of the city, with the council and mayor, is without doing, you can either do pension reform. If you can't do pension reform, the only other thing you can do is keep your costs, your direct costs for employees down by paying them less per hired fewer of them. Here's sort of the trend of pension costs over the last 15 years. It has been going up. These are the projections that my office, the CEO, has ask the actuary to make on our behalf. Right now, we're at around $1.2 billion is the annual expenditure for both fire, police, and also city, civilian pensions. And we anticipate this going up to about $1.4 billion in the next 4 years. It's a lot of money, and it looks pretty scary. It's important to note that when you look at the percentage of the city's budget that goes towards pension costs, it's actually somewhat flattened out over the last 6 or 7 years. This is the percentage of general fund. We're in the 18-19% range, and we've been there for a while. If you look at the overall city budget, we're in the 10 to 12% range over the last 10 years. And so that, for me, that feels like a more manageable number, but really it's sort of, you can make your own assessment, which you think about it. There's some areas that we see as risks for the 1920 budget. The budget does not include any funding for compensation adjustments for the MOUs that were not negotiated at the time of the budget being adopted. So this means that there's going to be fire changes, police changes, some but not all civilians. Most civilian compensation adjustments are included in the budget, but maybe about a quarter of them are not. So this is obviously going to be a risk because a lot of those changes are going to go into effect. We've since learned during this year, or have to find money during this year to make up for those salary increases. Always, it's not distinct this year. We always feel that there's a need to provide more investment in infrastructure. It's just a priority, and it's hard in a city of this size to fund it the way that you would want to. And also, for the last several years, there's reductions in city departments that they're going to have to manage towards. So they asked for more than they got. They received a lower amount, and they're going to have to act with efficiency and maybe hold off on hiring or make some changes in order to meet those targets. So that's actually last week in a nutshell. Does anybody have anything that they want to say before I move on to this week's portion of the presentation? Any questions? Is that really sped through that? Yeah.
So on the areas of potential risk, like infrastructure, are there any studies or that talk about how infrastructure is prioritized, and how does the Bureau of Street Services decide, what streets get done, and is there anything available public data that actually we can look at that could, show what it is that's being done and what's not getting done? Does the city do anything like that in terms of oversight?
Yes. So, many departments do have strategic funds. I don't know off the top of my head whether Street Services is one of those departments that has that for roads. Obviously, when you talk about roads, you're talking about multiple departments working together. There's so many different components, striping and paving, and all these things are sort of managed by different bureaus and departments, mostly Public Works and DOT. I don't know that there's a single comprehensive sort of strategic document. We did have that streets report, but that was kind of a different thing. I don't know that there's a single source for that, to be honest with you. We are working on updating the financial policies for the capital policies, which I'll talk about a little bit here. I think part of that would be to look at whether, sort of a more comprehensive capital strategic plan that the city should have. It really is something, we're not here just saying it's important that these investments be made sort of in context, right? Not sort of in response, right? You don't want to be reactive. You don't want to be like fixing the road that you notice is wrong. You want to kind of have a plan, and you want to have a mixture of dealing with crises, but also fixing the roads that can help you to save money in the long term. So it's not really my area. There may be something that's out there. I'm not familiar with a single sort of guiding strategic document for this.
Okay.
Yeah, in the budget, the mayor mentioned safety, sustainability, and several other things, but he does not mention health. And yet there are developers and the city has approved development right above oil wells. And that is, it's affecting the health, beingness of the surrounding neighborhoods. And yet, that's not accounted for in the budget.
Yeah, so I guess I would say that to me that seems more like a city planning issue, which obviously the budget would fund city planning, but in terms of my ability to speak as to the decisions that the city's making as to where they're zoning housing, it's really sort of outside of my expertise.
Thank you. Oh, it's city planning.
I would think that it sounds like a zoning issue. I mean, health obviously is, the health department is a county department, city isn't as involved. I think that's not your question. I think it's more about where we're located development. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now I'll slow down a little bit, and I'm going to start by talking about the 4-year budget outlook. This is a document that the CEO puts out twice a year, essentially, and then updates a third time. Once with their proposed budget, a second time with the adopted budget, and then we'll make comment on it each year in the first financial status report. This document in this document, we make projections. Our office makes projections as to what we think the expenditures and the revenues are going to be over the next 4 years. The intent is to kind of illustrate whether or not we think that the city is in structural balance. Are we going to be able to continue to pay for the investments that we've made, continue to pay for the current costs, keep the current level of services going, or are there going to be challenges that we're going to face in the coming years? This year, for the first time that I could find, I mean, it's been 20 years, we actually are projecting for the adopted budget and proposed budget also, we're projecting surpluses over the course of the next 4 years of 33, 27, 62, and $78 million. This is not happening. I went back and looked at all the books. We haven't done this since I moved back 2000 or something like that. So I think that was the last time that there was something. So that's kind of cherry, so let me just, we'll get to keep that button in your mind. So again, this is, so just a little bit of background as to how we make these projections. The revenue projections are based on historic growth. So we're not projecting a recession. We're not projecting a boom year. We're just projecting, for the most part, historical growth, less any one-time revenues that we know are going to get dropped out. So usually it's about a 3% in the out years. On the expenditure side, we're really just adding in expenditures that we know are going to occur. So if there's a commitment that's been made, then we'll include that expenditure in the coming year. So for example, if we know we're going to have elections every other year, we will put in the cost for elections. But this doesn't include sort of things that maybe everybody's saying that the city should do. Like, for example, it doesn't include the cost of rebuilding the Civic Center project where we're going to be building a new office building. That's not included because it hasn't been decided yet. We don't have a budget for that yet. So this is really our known expenditures compared to our sort of average revenues. So there are limitations to that, but I want to make that clear. So like I said, it tells us whether we're structurally balanced. So why do we care about structural balance? Because in the absence of structural balance, we're not going to be able to maintain our current services. If we know that expenditures are going to be above revenues next year, we're going to have to cut expenditures in order to, because we can't spend more than we're going to get in. So something that we're doing now may not get done next year. So imbalance, higher projected expenditures and revenues could signal that the city may have a hard time maintaining the current level of services. It also means that it's going to be hard for us, obviously, to add new services in future years if we don't have that kind of structural balance. So this is where, if you go to the document, you can find where you can link and see these two documents. The proposed budget is in the supporting information book, and the adopted budget outlook you can find actually in Appendix A. This is our disclosure document for when we issue our tax revenue anticipation notes every June. This is a document that we basically publish for rating agencies and investors who are interested in buying the city's debt, and that's where we publish the adopted budget outlook, which is the changes in the proposed. We'll also stick it in the back of the financial status report that should come out around Halloween. So the big things that this outlook does not take into account, the one that was published in Appendix A, the adopted budget outlook, is again the MOUs with the contracts with city employees that were not negotiated yet, right? So I mentioned already how this can be a problem in this fiscal year, paying for those increases, but the outlook in the out years also doesn't include the costs of those deals because we didn't know what the cost of those deals in the out years was at that time. We will try, although I don't know when we're going to have adequate data to do this, we'll try to probably say something about that in the first financial status report. That will definitely be reflected by the time we do the next outlook, which would be so no later. April is a long way off, but it is true that well, as soon as we have that information known, we'll put it out there in some format. It's because that's going to have an impact may turn some of these surpluses into deficits. It also doesn't take into account what the lacers and pensions, our two pension systems, police and fire, as well as civilian pension systems, what they have been signaling they're going to do, which is they're going to consider lowering their assumed rate of return, which basically means that the city would have a requirement to make a higher contribution each year to those systems. If they think that they're going to make less on their investments, then the city has to kick in more in order to make those systems whole. Those boards are going to consider their entire experience and their sort of all the data about what their inputs and outputs are, and they're going to do that early in 2020. So if they do that, if they do lower the rate of return, if they do find that the system costs more than the prior assumptions have led on that it does, then the city's projections for the contributions will also go up. Premature, I suspect, because usually when they signal that they're going to do this, they usually end up doing it. But this is a decision made by the boards, so we're all just going to be sitting there watching and learning together what they're actually going to do. But if they do bump it up, it's going to first impact the city's budget in 21, 22, and the outlook with the adopted budget. Next year's outlook will reflect that. And then also, like I sort of alluded to, there's no costs in the outlook associated with major infrastructure projects. Not like the little roads and stuff. We kind of have a placeholder in there to continue the same level of infrastructure investment. But if we're going to build a new office tower for city employees, if we're going to, enter into a deal to build a hotel and upgrade the convention center, if we're going to make a major investment in the LA River, these are big infrastructure projects. Those are not reflected in the outlook. Yeah.
Sorry if you already heard.
So now this is the open season. You guys, I didn't mean to please ask everyone.
Okay. So the supporting information book,
Yes.
is that the same as, sorry, I saw the list of all the books here. I know it's not the proposed budget.
It's a spiral-bound book that the CAO puts out.
All right, so that's not generally copies for the public generally. It's not the 4 bound books.
It's usually handed out at the same time as that book. We don't make a lot of extra copies for the public at all. In fact, I think next year we're going to
It's on the website.
I got it.
Yeah, and actually, this, if you click right there, you can go to the page, you can go to the document. There's also a link earlier in the presentation. So this is posted somewhere, and those links should work.
I just wanted to clarify what the actual document
It's a
was.
supporting information booklet for the Budget and Finance Committee prepared by the CEO. So we get a list of questions, and then when we prepare the booklet every year. Yeah.
Question. So lasers is a civilian union versus the LAFPP is fire and police?
Yeah, so LACERS is the retirement, the department that oversees the retirement for civilian employees, and LAFPP is Los Angeles Fire and Police pensions. So those two systems are single, they're together, and LACERS is for all the civilian employees. There's a separate one for the Department of Water and Power. I don't address that. Okay. So here's a picture of the cumulative 4-year deficits and surpluses for the last that we have projected in our outlooks for the last 10 years or so. Like I said, so here, if you look back at fiscal 2011, when we added up all of the deficits over the 4 years of the outlook, we had a $1.4 billion deficit that we were going to have to address if you add all those 4 up. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't do it in 1 year, but yeah, sort of. It's an exercise in tradition, which is fun if you like budgets, which of course I do. So then it got better, we kind of stabilized, and this year with those 4 years of surpluses for the first time, we're black with the $200 million over the next 4 years of surplus, cumulative surplus. Yeah.
One of the great things about the 4-year budget outlook was when Miguel Santana was the CAO, he was actually doing about 4 or 5 times a year, and just scared the living hell out of the people at City Hall and made them get their act together to do whatever they had to do. So this thing was very instrumental in getting some of those knuckleheads to toe the line.
Which are the knuckleheads?
The 15 ones that sit around the toilet seat.
The city council, girl.
I got it, thank you.
Okay, color commentary, thank you. That's not enough. So, okay, so actually I was going to move on from the outlook, unless anybody else had anything else to say about the outlook or anything else. Okay, great. So, the next sort of segment of the presentation is about the city's financial policies. So obviously the top is the link to the financial policies of the city of Los Angeles. This is a document that was approved by the city council in 2005. It includes sections on our fiscal policies, capital, reserve fund, pension, and debt. Talk about why it's important. So this is a document that we put out essentially to signal to the public, to rating agencies, to investors in the city, that the city has certain principles that it's going to follow. And those principles are intended to guide us towards financial fiscal responsibility, that we're going to do things consistent with best practices, or at the very least, we're going to tell you what we're going to do, and then we're going to follow those policies. It's a way of signaling and communicating, and just kind of making our sort of decision-making process transparent. It's a statement of sort of our values of fiscal, stewardship and responsibility. So it's an important document. A lot of, it's for that purpose, because that way people can look at the city and say, okay, this is what we can expect them to do. If we don't follow those policies, it's an important signal also that, okay, they're going to say they're going to do these things, but they're not. People can then make a decision about whether, how they feel about the way we manage our finances based on our not following our policies. If we do follow them, they can make a different decision. So I think it's an important thing that we have. The council adopted it, the mayor adopted it, sort of in the purview of the CEO to revise it periodically. But it's really, anyway, that's the importance of this document. We have 5 budget-related policies that we track, and I'm going to go through those one by one in a minute. Not included in the current version of the financial policies that were adopted in 2005 are 2 policies that were adopted since that time: the Budget Stabilization Fund policy and the encumbrance policy. So they're not currently in this document, but these are the links to those 2 policies if you'd like to read them. I'll talk about the Budget Stabilization Fund policy. The General Fund encumbrance policy basically just says that the city will not hold on to its encumbrances longer than 3 years. It's 3 years. So basically saying that we're just not going to let money sit unused. We're going to try to rotate it through, and if it's not going to be used for that purpose, we're going to release it and let it be used for other purposes. So that's sort of the big picture on the financial policies. And I want to talk about some of our compliance with those policies. This is kind of a checklist of the 5 policies that we review each year as part of the budget process. I'll have charts on each one of them. But what this shows is that for this 1920 budget, we are actually in compliance with all 5 of those policies. The reserve fund at least 5%, with a 6.25% reserve fund. Budget stabilization fund that we either use that for any revenues. So let me get to this one. Well, so budget stabilization fund policy essentially says that if we have, remember that chart I had with the 7 general fund revenues? It was the one with the line and the bars on it. Those 7 revenues, if we have growth in those revenues of over 4.5%, then any of that growth needs to either be put in the budget stabilization fund, to put the reserve fund above 5%, which it is, so we can use it for that, or to invest in capital. So this year, of the 62 million that we needed to put in, sort of fell into that category that was above the 4.5% threshold, we put about 73 million towards capital investment and another 7 as a contribution to the budget stabilization fund. Just out of curiosity, this policy, the 4.5%, was recently changed. I think it went into effect on, well, I shouldn't say this. It will go into effect on 9/24, revising the current threshold of 3.4%. We changed it consistent with the ordinance, which stated that after 5 years, the council will review the prior 5 years of growth, take that average growth, and that will be the new threshold. So I guess technically we're not in compliance today, but we'll be in compliance in about a week. So pardon my check. figured I'd need a little bit of artistic license on this one. So the capital investment policy of 1% says that we will use 1% of our general fund revenues towards capital. We put 1.11% in the 1920 budget towards capital at $73 million. The policies also state that all one-time revenues will be used for one-time expenditures. So any revenues that we don't expect to get on an ongoing basis, we want to make sure we spend that money on things that we don't need to spend for more than 1 year. So you want to put any of those revenues towards a project that will, that sort of is terminal, or towards, to buy equipment that you only need to buy one time. And we had actually $141 million in one-time expenditures, which is much more than our $63 million in one-time revenues. I mean, so a lot of our revenues are actually ongoing, we think, which is a good thing. And finally, we have sort of our debt limits. That we have a 6% debt limit for non-voter approved debt, 15% for voter approved. I'll get into some more detail when I get to those slides. I think it'll be easier to do it then. But we're well under those limits as well. Okay, so let me begin by talking about the reserves policies. This chart shows our cumulative reserves, which are at 8.51% in the 1920 budget. The bottom two are our reserve fund, and then the budget stabilization fund is this bar, and then the third component of our reserves is the unappropriated balance, which is essentially funding that's put aside that isn't dedicated for anything in particular. That would be our first line of defense. So we have about $35 million in that account that would be the first money that we can use towards any sort of unexpected things that occur during the year, whether it's reductions in revenues or unexpected expenditures. Yeah.
So, I mean, last week we talked about police and fire contracts,
Yeah.
which weren't done at this time, but like now, I guess they're known. And like, where's the money for that going to come from? Does it come from here?
Yeah, essentially, the very first line of defense would be having departments absorb any of those increases. I would anticipate that the fire and police department will probably not be able to absorb the full amounts of the contract increases that were not budgeted this year. And so what we would recommend as the first line of defense is always going to be the reserves, the unappropriated balance reserves, which is when it's really set aside for this type of whatever comes up, it's the easiest to transfer out of. The second place that we can go is the reserve fund. We try to maintain the reserve fund just because it's, but that would be the second place we would go. The budget stabilization fund, it's a lot harder to tap that because it's really intended to be used for times, just like we have to put money into the budget stabilization fund when our revenues are good, we're allowed to take money out of the budget stabilization fund, but only when our revenues are bad. So it's not really intended to be used for this type of over expenditure. So that would be we can, council mayor can suspend that rule. They have the authority to do that, but we wouldn't recommend that until we've impacted the other two reserves first.
Thank you.
So this is sort of the picture of our reserves. You can see it sort of upward trajectory. I mean, it's up and down, but it's if you look back 10, 11 years, we were the 4 to 5% range, and now we've been hitting the 7% range. We're up above 8 now, which is higher. So it's the trajectory is positive. I think just said some of this, but the reserve fund policy. So why do we have a reserve fund? Exactly because it helps us to prepare for the unexpected expenditures that we didn't budget for, unexpected drops in revenue that we didn't plan for. We need reserves in order to address those things during the year. Because if you don't have reserves, then what are we going to do in order to sort of make up for those challenges that happen during the course of the fiscal year? We don't have any other place to go. The reserve fund is that 5% level that we're aiming for. There's two components to the reserve fund. There's the emergency reserve, which is always 2.75 of the city's budget, required by charter. This really can only be used in an emergency. This is really intended to be the very sort of capped second. The first place that we would look is a contingency reserve, which is the balance of the reserve fund over 2.75%. And that's really the first place that you go for unanticipated expenditures. The difference is really the threshold that the mayor and council have to sort of task in order to use those funds, like how many votes they need in order to access. It's easier for council to vote affirmatively to tap the contingency reserve than it is for them to tap the emergency reserve. So this one is really for disaster, right? This is like earthquake kind of money. And this is easier to use for just overspending or a bad revenue year. The Budget Stabilization Fund, as I said, and I probably should have said before I got here, it's intended to provide a soft landing if tax revenues fall, and it's also intended to help us to prevent overspending, right? So if we have to put money into it, that means that that's money that we're not going to spend on things. So, if we have we've had these 6-7% increase years, these are good years, but we're not going to always have that level of growth. So we should really not spend that because it may be hard to maintain that. It may be sort of really an aberration, too good of a year. So that's the purpose of the Budget Stabilization Fund. And then, as I said, the unappropriated balance reserve, this is the first line of defense. So I just mentioned that this is the first place that we go. This is really an annual budget decision as to what the mayor and council want to put aside. This year, the mayor put in, I think, about 20, the council raised it to 35. I don't remember the exact numbers, but because of the acknowledgement that we may have issues with the MOU, with the employee contracts that were pending. So that's the end of the reserves discussion. Any questions, comments about the reserves? Okay. So the next policy I want to talk about is our capital investment policy. As I stated, this is that 1% of the general fund will be used for capital investment. If you look over the course of the last 13 or so years, we have been complying with this for since 2013-14. Before that, for many years during hard times, we were not able to. What does this mean? When the city has hard times and the absence of good reserves, one of the first places that we're going to go, maybe in the past, has been our infrastructure spending. Why? A lot of these are projects. They're one time. They don't trigger layoffs, but we sort of do less. That's what we did, the decisions that we made back then. I would hope that with a healthier reserve fund, that we would be able to continue to invest in infrastructure in bad times. But this is sort of an indication of what we've done in the past. But it's also a sign that we've sort of been able to commit to meeting those thresholds for the last 6 or 7 years, which is a good sign. Yearbook. And last year, 18-19, we had a record year. Now we're kind of back at a normal level. You can see the percentage. That was a 1.62 year. That was a big percentage, and back to 1.1% over 19-20. This policy is important because it encourages our investment in our critical infrastructure. This, again, only applies to general fund expenditures. So you take the general fund budget and you need to put 1% of that. It's important to note that the majority of our spending in infrastructure is done out of special funds, right? Our Measure R, Measure N, Measure W, gas tax. These are taxes that are dedicated towards infrastructure projects, and most of the spending, the general fund is maybe 20%. I don't have the number off the top, but basically most of our sewer funding, most of that is actually done by special funds and not by the general fund. So the policy doesn't really give you a full picture of how much we're spending on infrastructure, but by putting general fund towards it, we're kind of saying we have skin in the game. We're willing to make this a priority, even of our unrestricted funds. If you want to see sort of the list of projects that goes into this $70 million investment, you can go back to that supporting information book on pages 19 and 20, and it'll give you that list of projects. If you want me to give you a summary of what those are, I can do that right now. About $21 million goes to municipal facilities, which is basically city buildings. These are investments for improvements, or $6 million of that is for the Vision Theater, which is also a municipal facility. So money going towards facilities, towards upkeep, improvements. About $29 million of the general fund is going to street resurfacing and repair. I've already said a lot of money also goes towards that from special funds, but about $39 million is coming from the general fund as well. There's $15 million from the general fund that's being used for sidewalks. That's not the full extent of our sidewalk spending. Pursuant to the settlement that we discussed last week, the city is required to spend about $31 million on sidewalks in 1920, and we're doing that after spending about $40 million, but a portion of that is coming from special funds and other sources. This, again, reflects the general fund. We have $4 million going towards special physical plant projects. This includes street lighting projects, and street projects. These are kind of projects as opposed to general maintenance. And there's also $3 million for various community projects. Yeah.
Is the street resurfacing and repair for the D and F streets as opposed to the A, B, and C streets?
So there is funding this year for B and E streets, for failed streets, as well as for street resurfacing and slurry, the ABC type of general maintenance. And I'm not remembering off the top of my head which portion of that the general fund went. I believe it mostly goes to pavement, which is the maintenance, whereas the special funds are more dedicated towards those on D and E streets. So I think that this is mostly towards the pavement preservation program as opposed to reconstruction.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When will those DNF streets be fixed? When will they be?
So there is funding in the budget for them, but it's not, I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that we're using special funds for those. When will all of them be fixed? It's a big city, I don't know, probably it's, probably not without increased revenue sources available, because it's an overwhelming task. But we are making progress towards where we're making investments in dealing with street reconstruction, those failed streets, which the city for many years did not do. So we've begun over the last couple years to begin to invest in those again. And I think part of the issue is that for the same money, we can keep a lot of A, B, and C streets in reasonable shape for maybe for 2 miles of D and E streets. So it's like, well, what sort of like which one is more important? I think it's important to strike balance, and now they're beginning to invest in
Yet
both.
one grade can kill people and the other one won't kill people.
That's true, but if you don't maintain your A, Bs, and Cs, they're going to be D and Fs soon. So you can't just reconstruct, because then you're going to have a bigger problem to deal with. So you really need to strike a balance between those two. So I think that now that we're investing in both, I think it's a better balance, and we've personally been able to do it because of a lot of the tax revenues that voters have approved through R and M, which makes it possible for us to have more money to put towards these projects, and we're spreading it on towards those D&Es. Yeah.
Have you ever done analysis of the capital funding that's based on user fees in terms of how an economic downturn has any impact on those? I mean, I realize people have to flush their toilets and pay that bill anyway, but have you looked at those revenues that are user-based, fee-based, and is there any impact in an economic downturn?
Yeah, so when we think about economically sensitive revenues, we tend to focus more on tax revenues, because those ones have been the ones that have proven more volatile in the past. Our license, permits, fees, and fines, I think, has been probably slightly more stable for us over the years, and so we don't include that in our analysis of economically sensitive. It's probably because that is a combination of probably 1,000 different revenue sources. Some of them undoubtedly would be impacted, but also because it's such a broad sort of category, probably, it's like a big hedge fund, right? I mean, so we tend to not look, if it's I think, if you're just strictly fee programs, we don't. And also for fee programs, if the fees are less, services are less, we can just provide less of the service, right? We can.
Well, actually, I was asking based on capital investment.
Okay.
Because like the sewer charge, isn't that some of that money going to be used for sewer replacement, sewer pipe?
Yeah. Okay. So yes, and as a special fund, I haven't really focused on that much in this presentation, and I haven't actually done a whole lot of analysis of what the impact of economic downturn is on sewer or trash. I think so. I have not done that analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a lawsuit for a 30-year repair of sidewalks.
Yes,
Is that 15 million a year, is that toward that?
yes. This, like, the 1920 amount, total amount that the city is paying towards sidewalks is 40 million, which is about 9 or 10 million more than what's required under that lawsuit, which is 31 million. But we've, a portion of that money is coming from other funding sources. So this, again, is the financial policy for the general fund. So this is the general fund portion. But there's also special funds that are dedicated for this type of infrastructure that we are putting towards sidewalks elsewhere. So this is, we would include repairs that are being made, that are being funded by proprietary departments if they're building sidewalks around their facilities. We have $10 million in AM or gas, that's one of those ones to just do sort of sidewalk acceleration. So there's other places that we're also funding sidewalks, and we are meeting the requirements of that lawsuit.
So factoring in inflation, increased costs, will the job get done, or will we be facing a shortfall of funds?
After 30 years?
Because of,
You know, I don't know.
Gary, it's a 30-year settlement. The first 5 years is 31 million, it goes up 15%, 36 million. In another 5 years, it goes up 15%. The total amount is $1.35 billion, and it's supposed to solve the problem.
okay,
We'll see.
thank you.
We'll see.
Good numbers.
Yeah.
Regarding sidewalks, are we strictly talking about concrete sidewalks, or is there any other options to concrete?
No, they're always talking about sort of permeable sidewalks and other sort of alternatives. I've seen the different reports that the city council has asked for to look at veterinary services. I think has written reports with different options for sidewalks. I don't think there's a requirement that the sidewalks be the material. The requirement is that they be passable.
Right.
So, you know, obviously that would have to be the first priority, but I don't believe that the material itself is mandated. That's all. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. Move on to the capital policy. Okay. The next policy that I want to talk about is the one-time revenue and one-time expenditure policy. Like I said, what this policy says is that the amount of money that we're getting in as one-time revenues needs to, all of that money needs to be used for one-time expenditure. So in other words, the dark orange bar has to be bigger than the peach colored bar, right? So we've been doing that for a while, but not always, right? And this year we're exceeding it by, last couple of years we've exceeded it by quite a bit. It's this policy is important because it really indicates whether or not it helps us to get a sense of whether or not we're structurally balanced, right? Because like I said, if you're using a lot of one-time revenue to pay for your ongoing services, then the next year you're gonna have a hard time continuing to pay for the services. So the last several years we've met that policy. It's sort of a signal that maybe we're gonna be okay with keeping these policies, these services going in the subsequent year. There's the outlook to look at, there's this to look at, there are different things. This is another indicator of structural balance. Like I said, $63 million in one-time revenues are entirely used for $141 million in one-time expenditures. If you want to see the detail of what those expenditures and revenues are, you can go to the supporting information book on page 17 and 18. We don't update this for the adopted budget. We also don't do that for capital. We update it, but we don't publish the updates. Just sort of a summary of, if you don't want to go to the list and see everything, here's sort of the big ticket items. The major one-time revenues is one thing is a transfer from the special parking revenue fund. The main driver of this is our sale of a property over in Tokyo called the Mangrove property, and that money, because of the way that property came into the city, it has to be funneled back through the special parking revenue fund. The special parking revenue fund, we transfer funds every year to the general fund, about $23 million. This indicates that we actually were able to transfer about $50 million, but most of that increase is due to this one property that we sold. that was sort of a parking property. We sold it to MTA, or we leased part of it to MTA. So that money is going to come in and it's just going to be able to be returned to general fund. So that's a one-time revenue.
So it was just a parking lot.
It wasn't, I think it was, I don't know honestly what we used it for, but it was the way that we purchased it, I think, was through this fund. So it's just that it needed to go back through the fund. The fund is actually unrestricted. We put money in there ourselves for parking purposes, but there's actually, we have discretion as to how the money.
What's the
You bought
name
it or
again?
you sold it?
What's that?
You bought it?
We sold it.
Oh, you sold it, okay,
Yeah.
and then this is the revenue from the sale?
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yeah.
And what's the name of the
Property,
property?
Mangrove.
Okay.
Could you elaborate on the special parking revenue fund, what is that?
So it's really money that comes in from parking revenues and then is supposed to be used for parking projects in the area, but there's, the city sort of imposed that requirement on ourselves, and if there are surplus funds available, council and mayor have the discretion to return any portion of that fund to the general fund. So we've kind of set up that every year we'll transfer about $23 million back to the general fund. And some years we do more, some years we do less. Anything that's more than that we consider to be one-time revenue, because that $23 million is sort of the standard amount we transfer.
And I'm sorry, and the revenues coming in are from special?
It's parking revenue, I believe. So parking lots.
Parking lots versus parking citations.
Not citations, it is not from citations, no.
And all the parking citation money goes back into the revenue fund,
Directly to the general fund, yeah.
right?
That declining
And
revenue is a general fund revenue.
And do you know the dollar amount of that citations about?
Yeah, I had it was, I think it's around 140.
14.
Is that what we had earlier?
I mean, it used to be 140.
Yeah, it's been going down. I think we're at like 124 this year.
Oh, okay.
124. That's what we're at for 1900. Okay. Yeah.
You have cannabis receipts, I believe it was 14 million. What is this, I've certainly created quite a bureaucracy of oversight and enforcement, and how does this all balance out? Is it becoming an overwhelming cost
Okay.
in regards to what we get out of it?
Right. So here's that line you were talking about, the delayed cannabis receipts, the 14 and accelerated cannabis receipts of $14 million. This is general fund receipts, business tax. So this is the money that we're generating from businesses that are paying taxes to operate in the city. What you're talking about, the administrative costs, are actually being supported by fees that are paid by these businesses. So the business tax that they pay is general fund revenue. The fees that they pay to operate, their licensing fees, et cetera, those fees are actually special fund revenue that are only used to support the program that supports those. So that program should be fully fee supported. So yes, it's a big, huge program, but it should be being fully paid for by the businesses themselves. This 14 million out of the 66 million or so that's cannabis revenue and business tax is free and clear for the city to use for any purpose.
Do you have a number for that cost?
For the
Even though
cannabis?
they're paying for it?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but if you were to go to the white book, which there's a link to the slide on, the sort of the budget slide, and go to the cannabis regulation, what's it called, Department of Cannabis Regulation, you can find their budget and you see in the source of funds how much they're getting and how much we're paying for that. There's also funding that's going to some other departments, so it's not exclusive. There may be a schedule, I think we published a schedule this year that would have all the departments that are receiving it. That would be in the back of the budget book once that is schedule something, I don't remember the number on the top of my head, but there's a cannabis schedule that will tell you how much money we're going to get into the supported program, which departments will be receiving it. Okay, the third is sales of CRA properties. Again, anything that's sort of, this is sort of the typical, just like Mangrove, this is a typical one-time revenue. It's a sale. A sale of property, you can only do that once. I'm laughing because actually we've anticipated selling mangrove in prior years, so we've actually budgeted that revenue more than once. But typically, once you sell it, you can't sell it.
What are the CRAs? City?
Community Redevelopment
But
Agency.
that's been,
Right.
not been in existence for several years. So
Right, so we're kind of still doing closeout in the city, and the properties that we're disposing of, and as we dispose of those properties and we receive revenues to the city, we consider that to be a one-time revenue.
Okay, why don't you use them and rehabilitate them for the homeless housing instead of doing, well,
Yes,
for that?
absolutely. So we are looking at any opportunity for any place that we can use housing, $1.7 billion for HHH to identify properties that can be used. And certainly any surplus property in the city or anything that could be used for that is being considered for that.
Okay, so these CRA housing properties exist all across the city, all across all city districts.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the locations of all of them, but they are citywide.
Citywide, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm surprised that they're not used to that, and they're dependent on the HHH and waiting for the HHH, and that's taking forever when the city can utilize these, revitalize them, and get the homeless in there.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the uses of all these properties are, but it's a huge program, and I expect that, the intent is to use it for a variety. I just don't know enough about it,
Okay,
but yeah, I feel like they probably are looking into that opportunity.
And $6 million isn't that much property in LA, so I'm sure there's some that they are repurposing,
I
right?
think that's probably,
This is for one property, one sale,
no, this is multiple sales.
or multiple
Yeah,
sales.
I'm not sure what the
But you
details
say
are.
there are there are many across the city.
Yeah, and not all of them will be sold. So we're doing, each
And
one
this is
is,
just for one or two, so I'm talking about the ones that have not been sold. The
yeah, so
CRA.
each one is being sort of looked at for its own, and maybe some of them are still sort of serving this current purpose that they were serving under CRA, but they need to be administered in a different way. I don't have expertise in this program, but I do know that we are
Where
considering.
can I find information on that on CRA? Which revenue book?
Yeah, I'm not sure, I mean, the questions you're asking are more programmatic, I'm not really sure where we outline that. This is kind of handled outside of the budget process, really.
Oh.
But these sales are revenues that come in, that's the only place.
So planning would know that.
What's that?
Is that planning would know that or housing?
The Department of Economic and Workforce Development takes care of the CRA transfer properties. They are the ones that would know.
Oh,
Okay, so on the expenditure side, some of the big one-time expenditures that you'll be reserved for mid-year adjustments. Like I said, this is a budget year, an annual decision that the council and mayor make. We have $35 million set aside for contingencies that may come up. There's also $60 million for retroactive compensation adjustments. These are one-time because they're just paying people for sort of the delay in approving the employee compensation adjustments. We have some repayments to special funds that we're catching up for some, some prior year. We have to repay some special funds, but we don't have to do it on a one-time basis. It's sort of a true-up type of situation, not ongoing. And then, of course, we have capital and infrastructure projects, which are just one-time. And also there's some homeless services, construction that are also considered one-time. So these are just examples of some of the one-time expenditures that these one-time revenues are being used towards. Okay, the next policy that I want to talk about is our debt policies. There's two of them. The first one is that sort of our debt payments need to be less than 6% of our general revenues for the non-voter approved debt. Non-voter approved debt, as you can see, this is for this year, and we're projecting that we're going to remain below that level for the next 6 or 7 years. Okay, let me go through this one too. And then also for voter approved debt, we have to be below 15% of general revenues. I'll define these two terms in a minute. And as you can see, we're well below that for the foreseeable future as well. So So, you know, these policies are important because they demonstrate that our debt is manageable, that we're not issuing more debt than we're going to be able to pay back. It's under sort of a best practices type of level. Our debt burden, and the charts show that we are, like I said, we're underneath those levels. So the first chart, which was a non-voter approved debt, the majority of non-voter approved debt is debt that the city can issue. Mostly, the most common one is something called MICLA, which is essentially we are kind of borrowing against our own facilities. So we kind of make lease, it's a lease payment, we lease out to a 501c4, an independent organization. And based on the value of those properties, we can borrow against sort of that. This is really the most common. You know, we use this debt for some improvements in the city. We use it for purchase of some equipment. This debt is paid for by the general fund entirely. And you know, because of the fact that we're kind of issuing it on our own without voter approval, that the threshold is slightly lower, that we shouldn't have a higher this high.
It's a 501c4?
Yes. Yes, not a 501c3, it's slightly different, I'm not sure what the C4
Oh,
is.
C4 is different than C3.
So like I said, the bulk of this is that MICLA program. We also have some judgment obligation bonds. This was 6 or 7 years ago. We issued some bonds, helps to pay for big settlements. I think it was Melee was one, the big payment that we had to make out. I don't know what the other one, I forget off the top of my head. But so those are the debts. Those two sources of debt are the main. Also, convention center, that we have to get under 6% of our general revenues for those. You can find the details about this in the Capital Finance Administration Fund budget. This lists out essentially every single thing that we're issued debt for under these programs. Like I said, MICLA, it's limited to capital equipment and property. So, you know, we use it for fire trucks. We should use it if we're going to purchase a new city facility. Everything that we purchase has to have a useful life of at least 6 years. We prefer even 10 years because that's usually how long we are paying back this debt. We prefer to do it for high value items. I think our goal is at least $250,000 an item. We don't want to do it for smaller things. And we need to have it be on for things that are kind of attached to a building, easy to find. If people are going to invest in it, they want to be able to look at the asset that they are paying, that we're sort of using as collateral for our borrowing. Non-voter approved debt, which is the 15% level. This includes all of the debt. It's both non-voter and voter approved. It includes all the ones that I just talked about, but it also includes our revenue bonds. So solid waste, wastewater, and also any debt issued by proprietary departments. So this is sort of a fuller universe of the debt that we issue. There's why it's a 50% level. It's a bigger revenue source, and we're also way underneath that.
Includes the debt by proprietary departments?
What's that?
Includes debt by the proprietary departments?
It does say that right there, and I read it, and I wrote it at some point, but yes, I believe that it does, yeah. That's what I read you.
Okay. I mean, that's, DWP has $15 billion in debt.
Yeah, that's what we get.
Wow.
Did $50 billion in debt?
Uh-huh.
How do they have so much?
Got a lot of assets.
Oh, that's, I was gonna say, they already get money hand over a freaking fist.
I don't think it includes proprietary departments.
Yeah, anyway, I'll check that, thank you, Jennifer. So for voter approved debt, these are, a lot of the stuff is the requirements as opposed to MICLA, which is sort of, we have our own policies as to what we can and can't spend that on. Voter approved debt is really, how we spend the money is really determined on the provisions that the voters have adopted when they voted for that debt. So they tell us what we can spend it on, and it's limited based on sort of what voters have agreed to let us spend that money on. Okay, so those are the 5 main budget policies that we talked about. Yeah.
Just a quick question. So the cap for voter approved is the discretion of the city rather than when you have a legal mandate, are they looking at like the bond rating?
Yeah, I think the 15% and the 6%, I believe they're both set by city policy as opposed to sort of state or federal requirements. And we have a ton of requirements for how we, sort of for our debt, but I think that these thresholds we establish ourselves, is my understanding.
What, are there charter provisions that limit the amount of debt?
I don't believe that the charter does that. Can't think of where it would. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Maybe it's been our financial policies. This is about the financial policies.
So they could, the bottom line is when they get up to 6%, if they decide, oh, we want to do more voter indebtedness, they have the discretion to change that policy.
Yeah, and like I said in the beginning, sort of if we don't follow our policies, then sort of the strength of them comes from doing what we say we're going to do. So if you change your policies every time it becomes challenging, then people will be like, well, I see how seriously you take your policy. So as you can see, we've been under it for quite a while, and we don't project that being an issue. And we talk about that when we're talking about the projects that we're going to do. So when we're looking at doing the convention center project, or we're looking at doing the civic center, we'd say what's the impact going to be on our debt policy. So
the only reason I asked is that I think maybe it's LA Unified School District. I believe one of those has a legal indebtedness cap, and that's I wanted to clarify.
Yeah. I don't believe that we have that same thing LSU because it's a sort of subsection of city utilities. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So other policies that are in the financial policies that we also sort of pay attention to but don't sort of report on as actively in the budget, sort of something we do. So we're always saying this one in our financial status reports, the policies discourage interim appropriations for new programs. So what this basically says is that the city will not initiate new programs, provide funding for new programs during the course of the fiscal year, but instead they'll be considered through the budget process, except for in extreme circumstances. So departments are always asking for stuff in September, and we're like, do we wait for the budget process? It's just sort of best practice, let the decisions be made. And the reason for that is because we want budget decisions to be made in the context of the entire budget. We want to be able to look at everything and prioritize the single decision. Everything sounds really important. And the fact is that all the services that we provide are important. There's a good justification for increasing spending on a lot of them. But unless you look at them next to everything else you're providing, it's hard to understand how to prioritize what to spend it on. The financial policies actually require that we develop a multi-year forecast, which is why we have the 4-year outlook as one of our financial policies, which I already talked about. We have a financial policy that says that we will limit the subsidies that we're going to provide to grant programs, and it will consider whether or not there's going to be a requirement that the general fund kick in to support these grants, and it will limit that, as part of the consideration of accepting those grants. The financial policies encourage new and diverse revenues, that the city seek new and diverse revenue streams in order to have a healthy revenue base. And also, I think we talked about this last time when we talked about license permits, fees, and fines, that the city seek full cost recovery for any fee supported programs. We did talk about this when we talked about trash pickup. So it's a financial policy that we will seek that full cost recovery for any programs in which you can identify, distinctions there. Okay, this is water. Move on to the budget process. Any questions about the financial policies? So I want to run through the budget process. The main purpose for talking about the budget process is so that you understand where the budget is at different points in the process. If you know where it is, you know who to pester to have them make a change for you, right? So let's see, we are. Okay. So this year begins in July, August, actually this year in September. The mayor just released his policy letter, and then departments begin doing their budget requests. They continue to, so for the next, until November 22nd, the departments are going to be developing their budgets. The mayor will be meeting with the mayor They'll be talking to them about priorities, but for the next 2 months, the budgets are with the departments. Then the departments release their budgets, submit them to the mayor, and the mayor basically begins his review, which continues through April. You should know that the mayor begins to meet with departments in earnest, like around February, after the internal review between the CEO and the mayor's office. And most of the bulk of decisions are going to be made between the middle of February and the end of March. So during that time, that's really the time the mayor is making all of the decisions about how he's going to, what he's going to fund and how he's going to balance the budget. On April 20th, the budget is released to the city council. I would note that decisions are made no later than early April, because there's all those documents have to be produced, and we need to have decisions before we can even really begin finalizing those documents. So there's kind of a dead decision zone throughout most of April until the budget comes out on the 20th, and then city council begins to review the proposed budget, usually around April 27th, about a week after release, and it goes to the Budget and Finance Committee for about 2 weeks. At that point, the city council the Budget and Finance Committee is where the action is and who you want to talk to. Then around the middle of May, the full council considers the budget. Got to say that at that point, the council over the past several years has not made major changes to the recommendations made by the Budget and Finance Committee. Probably if you're going to start to try to influence things by the time it gets to city council, you probably miss the vote. So you want to get on it no later than the Budget and Finance Committee. And then the council must adopt the budget by June 1st, and the mayor has a week after that, or 5 days after that, to veto. Then it goes back to council for 5 days after.
As you may know, the budget advocates recommended that the budget come out on February 1st, so that we have adequate time to review and comment on the budget, and as opposed to having it being done in secret.
Yes.
That went, Eric, that went over like a skunk at a garden party. But
yeah. It'd be super tough for us to get it out February 1st because we don't have revenues. So even when we get it out on April 20th, we're scrambling to get our revenues.
The state has a $215 billion budget. They do it on January 10th.
Who does?
The state.
Yeah, but then they completely redo it again in May.
Yeah, but but it's done out in public.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
Sort of, yeah.
Key things about how the budget decisions are made. It's kind of a simple math problem, but the revenues have to equal expenditures, right? We can only spend as much as we're going to get in. So obviously revenues are a limiting factor as to what the expenditures are going to be. And as I just said, general fund revenues are not finalized until early April. We don't even know how much we really have to spend until that time. They continue to be revised. But one of the big revenue sources and one of the variable ones is business tax. It's not even due. It's due February 1st, but the payments really can't figure them out until the end of March, because most of the payments come in the second half of March, and that's really one of the drivers of why we can't make those revenue estimates earlier. So because we don't know the revenues until April, the mayor's team really has a list of priorities. What do they want to spend money on? And then as we figure out, have a better sense of how much money we have, then we can sort of fund those, go down the list and fund the ones that there's available money for them. Because again, you can't spend more than you have. Just as a rule, the number of high priority items always exceeds the amount of money that we have. Right? We never have enough revenues to pay for everything that should be and we would like to fund. It's just not possible. So the whole thing is about prioritization. Trying to figure out a cheaper way to do the things that have been requested, trying to find ways to maybe squeeze a couple dollars out here or there. There's always going to be limitations on how much we can do. So the mayor, when he makes his decisions, looks at his own priorities. And he also looks at inputs from a variety of sources. He meets with the departments, the public. He meets with your body, and he meets with the city council. So he's getting a lot of inputs from all the different priorities around the city, and decisions on spending are based on that when compared against available revenues. By the time it gets to city council, they really redo the whole thing and look at the whole same set of inputs that they get. They have the mayor's budget. The Budget and Finance Committee will probably, we'll talk to other members, maybe take some of the considerations from the other city council members into account. but also they hear from labor, they hear from the budget advocates, they hear from the public, they hear from departments. So I guess essentially they hear from the same sources that the mayor did. The committee is in a situation where they are presented a balanced budget by the mayor. So if they want to fund something, they have two choices that the mayor did not fund. If they want to put money towards something that the mayor didn't fund, they can either cut something that the mayor did fund or try to identify revenues that the mayor was not able to identify. So they can either find more money or cut something that the mayor funded in order to add new things. So they're, they get a balance, they need to set it back balanced as well. So like I said before, the Budget and Finance Committee recommended adjustments to the budgets. They actually recommend, a lot of adjustments. I mean, it's percentage-wise, it's not a huge amount, but there's a lot of action on the periphery that council does to change priorities, and sometimes they make really significant changes that the Budget and Finance Committee makes. But then, like I said, by the time it gets to City Council, this is not a hard and fast rule. Over the past several years, there have not been as many changes. They more or less adopted the Budget and Finance Committee's report. So again, if you want to have impact, the mayor is first, and then the City Council, then the Budget and Finance Committee is really the next place to go. Just because I'm representing the city administrative officer, I thought like what we did related to the budget, shameless plug. It's really our job. The mayor tells us what his approach is, what his goals are. It's our job to design the budget process. We're the ones who put together the forms, instructions to departments, coordinate with departments, tell them what to submit, how to submit it. It's really, we design the budget process. We administer that process. We also help departments to prepare their budget documents, answer questions about what it is that the mayor has requested of them, provide them with input in that way. And then once they submit them, we review all the requests that the departments make, and we make recommendations to the mayor's office as to what we think should be funded. We also, track big picture budget data. Some of the stuff that I talked about earlier, the financial policies, the reserves, and we let the mayor know what the impact is going to be on those sort of big picture metrics based on the decisions that they're considering making. And also let them know if the proposal is going to comply with the city's financial policies. We also produce all the budget documents that are part of the proposed budget, with the exception of the budget summary, which is the budget summary which the mayor puts out, the mayor's office puts out. But all of the documents, technical documents, the detail positions out, the detail of departmental programs, the revenue book, those are all produced and published, reflecting the mayor's decisions by the CAO. After the budget is released, we are staffed to the Budget and Finance Committee. Mostly we work with them on coordinating the budget number process, but we also answer hundreds of questions that we receive from the committee. Mostly written questions that we receive, but also at the table we answer questions. And once the budget is approved, we prepare the budget resolution together with the city attorney's office. So that's the document that the council is adopting that is making the changes to the mayor's budget. Yeah.
As the CIO analysts are meeting with the departments, are the mayor's budget people meeting with the departments at the same time? Or is their work entirely before the mayor submits his budget?
There are meetings going on with all of the above all the time. Department with CEO, CEO with mayor, mayor with department, mayor with CEO. We all talk to each other all the time. So it's a constant.
Do you meet together ever?
We do meet together. In February and March, and there may be other meetings that we also, yes, we meet together all the time as well. But with CLA and everybody, there's never a shortage of meetings. All of them comply with the Brown Act. We don't have meetings that are not permissible at the Brown Act. I can assure you of that.
Do the city council members get involved in some of these meetings?
The city council members do get involved. CEO doesn't. I mean, we are available to provide briefings to city council members who want them, mostly after the budget is released, but at any point, if they have any questions for us, we meet with them all the time about a variety of things as well. But they certainly work closely with city departments, they work closely with the mayor's office, they work with the Budget and Finance Committee members, in terms of where they're trying to impact the way the budget is going to look. So city council members get involved, and some more than others, and some. So everybody's involved constantly. So great big party. It's great. So that's kind of the way the budget is developed. I mean, I don't know if that provides you any insight. I mean, it's kind of a mess, but I think if you kind of know where it is, when, then you know where to poke your finger to impact, right? You don't want to go pounding the Budget and Finance Committee in October when the department's still working on their budget, and you don't want to be talking to the department in April when it's before the Budget and Finance Committee. So you just kind of want to know where it is when to try to have the most impact by knowing whose sort of world it's in. Yeah.
So when you say the mayor meets with the NCBA, I mean, when we met with them, I wouldn't call that a meeting, but mainly our book, the book that we produce is handed to them, and through that means, I guess we communicate to them what our priorities are, because it's hardly a conversation when we meet with them. And I don't know if the rest of the VAs agree, but that's what my perception is, that there's no back and forth discussion.
When we meet with the Budget and Finance Committee as budget advocates, do they, or and during the entire budget hearing process, the couple of weeks, do they have our white paper there all the time?
They, so for the past several years, the white paper has been submitted in time for our office to write a companion report, which the council members can use as a kind of cheat sheet for which recommendations in the white paper have been incorporated and not incorporated in the proposed budget. So they have that information. They've had that information before that for the past several years.
Is there we meet with the department general manager and senior managers and talk about the budget, but is there a meeting like with the mayor's budget people and the department, or the CAO, mayor's people and the department, that it would be sort of a pivotal meeting or something where the neighborhood, where the budget advocates could actually sit in? I don't know if it's a specific meeting or to better understand, the dynamics of, how the budgets are reviewed and that sort of thing, because, I think our involvement is limited, and I think being, embedded or at least part of that dialogue might be interesting, even if it's just a one-time meeting or something. Maybe took like our transportation, your street services, or is there a meeting that might be useful for us to better understand what's going on that you could facilitate?
So I think that this request has been made in the past, and I think it's most appropriately made to the mayor's office. So
Here's your answer.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, there's not a pivotal meeting. There are dozens of meetings. There's hours and hours of meetings. There's like a lifetime of not seeing your family kind of meetings. So yes, there are those meetings definitely occur. But in terms of, they're not required to be sort of open to the public, and to this point they have not been. I know that it's been suggested before to the mayor's budget team that really they're the ones who would have to make that decision. So it's really at that point, it's their budget. They're the ones who are developing it. They need to decide how they want to manage that part of the process.
Are they put on the calendar so we know that there are meetings?
They're not put on a public calendar, no. They're not public meetings.
The budget,
Back to the budget and finance hearings. It's my impression that some of the changes that occurred after the budget and finance hearings are things that were strongly recommended in the budget advocates report, just a few of them, were discussed by budget advocates before for the Budget and Finance Committee at the hearings that they had, where, for instance, I identified myself and others identified themselves as budget advocates and referred to the reports. I encouraged this year that some of those people, and I did myself, bring copies of the report and handed them to the Budget and Finance people, as well as some copies for the CAO people and the mayor's people who were also present for the hearings, as they always are. So I think that could have helped in making the case, because otherwise you only have 1 minute to make your case before the Budget and Finance Committee. Do you agree? Is that good? Can we do that?
So, I guess since you've asked, I can say what I think. I try not to make sense of this price, but I guess one thing that I would say, having observed a number of sort of budget processes, is that the committee is most likely to make changes when there is a lot of support for an item, as opposed to sort of a little bit of support for a lot of items, right? So in my experience, it's when you turn out, 15 or 20 people for a program that's been cut, or for a program that people really want to enhance, or an issue that's really important to people. And a lot of people are talking about the same thing. They're talking to their council members, they're talking before the committee, they're talking to whoever's going to listen, they're getting, play in the press. So one thing I would say is when I look at the white paper, which I do every year, and you provide a list of hundreds of recommendations, or at least 100, 150, a lot of recommendations. Like, sometimes I feel like, having the 10 people at the table advocating for 150 things isn't as good as having 15 people advocating for one thing. So that would be my, I don't know if that's responsive to your answer. I know that's sort of a shift, but that's my personal observation of that.
Yeah, well, I remember hearing at least 20 people speak on the attorney or counsel representation for tenants. And that came up, and it did approve it, but yet it hasn't been approved as of yet.
So that was actually added to the budget for the.
It was under the.
I think they added about $1 million for that.
But
there are some things that they didn't. They don't. But I mean, there are other people advocating for an increase, continuing the justice fund. But that was. They didn't add money for that. But the reason they didn't add money for the justice fund was because there is money in the justice fund already. There's the money that hadn't been spent yet, and at the current pacing, it was not necessary. So they're not going to do everything that people asked to do, but they did ask for money to provide legal services for undocumented immigrants. That was not in the budget, and they did, in fact, add funding for that. So they did, in fact, that's, I think, a good example of how they did listen to a lot of people.
And they did implement it because the housing hasn't implemented the vacant.
I don't know what
opportunity for tenant representation.
I'm not, if you say that, then I'll take your word for it, but the funding is there, and I expect that at some point
So
they
the
will.
money is there. They just have to find a way.
If we're talking about the same thing, then yes, they added money for that.
Oh.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned, I think in response to a statement that there's been efforts to meet with the mayor during the budget process early on. And I believe your response was that it's required, but it's not always done. Did I get that right?
I don't think that I would know. I think I may have misspoken if I said that. The question I was answering was about whether, or if this is what I was referring to, whether or not it would be, if there'd be some way to embed the neighborhood council budget advocates into budget meetings, and that, I think I said, that would be up to the mayor's office to make that decision, and it would not be required because it's not a public meeting, it's really the mayor's budget, and that team gets to determine how they want to handle that, what kind of input they want from the public. So there is not a requirement that the mayor meet with anybody. If the mayor doesn't satisfy the public's interest, then every 4 years the public gets to fire the mayor. That's sort of the, the council has brownout requirements they have to meet publicly. I don't know where the mayor is subject to the same rules. I mean, it's intelligent for him to do that, and my observation that he does sort of make himself available to the public and listen to public perception as any successful politician tends to. But there's not a requirement that the mayor meet with anybody during the budget process pursuant to charter. The department is submits the budget, he gets the budgets for departments on January 1st. Submits done, yeah, I think 20. Yeah.
So do you think it might be wiser for us to, as soon as we finish our recommendations and we do our presentation page for each department, that we, and our board, our budget board approves it, or what is it called, budget advocates approve our sheets, can we send them individually to the departments so they can know what our recommendations are, and they can see them while they're creating their budget?
So the departments are done creating their budgets on November 22nd. The white paper tends to come out towards the end of March, so it's a little bit too late to impact. Your best opportunity to impact the departments is when you're meeting with them over the next several weeks, because they're going to start working on their budgets today.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Real quick aside on sort of, we build the budget, but it's also important that we implement the budget. So I think I only have one slide on budget control. It's important to, it's important to us that we, throughout the year we need to review and adjust the budget to make sure that the funds are available for the purposes. We don't guess all the expenditures or the revenues exactly right. Things need to be shifted around. We may have expenditure shortfalls or revenue shortfalls. We may need interim funding for programs that are required. There's a number of things that we might need to, the different things we need to do during the course of the budget year. But there's limitations on how much departments and, that we can change the budget without going through council approval. So it's very low, like $50,000 is how much you can shift money from one account to another. So most of the action on shifting around funds during the course of the fiscal year occurs in the CEO's financial status report, and there's a link to those reports because that goes to the city council for approval. The city council requests that our office does that several times a year, which we do 4 times a year generally. And departments come in, they'll ask us to to make sort of recommended transfers we make to help them to make their accounts balance. We look at them, we do independent review and analysis, and make recommendations to the council as to where money needs to be moved to and from. So the budget it's a constant adjustment. It's a guess that we're making in the beginning of the fiscal year. It's our best estimates, and then we adjust it as the year goes on based on our constant evaluation of where the departments actually are. And during that process, we also provide updates on the reserves and revenues and raise any issues of concern in the city, whether it's a need to spend money on new things, if there's any sort of disaster or emergency, if anything has changed, we report on that through that process. So you can read those reports. First one should be out around Halloween, before Halloween. Okay, so I want to move on now to a new topic, a new category of stuff that Barbara suggested that I do this year. And in fact, the general topic is how do you analyze a budget request? And so what this is sort of slightly, what's the word? Tomorrow for the first, no, I should say the first time. Tomorrow our office is going to be doing a training, my group is going to be doing a training for the budget analysts in the CEO's office. And, so I took that presentation that we put together for tomorrow's budget training and kind of just tweaked it a little bit so you can see what we look at in our office when we're looking to review budget requests. And I hope this may help you, but it may not. As you go through it with departments, sort of how do we frame questions when we're looking at budget requests? Basically the goal, I think, when you're looking at budget requests is you want to make a recommendation. I'm going to talk through some of the steps for how you come to making that recommendation, and then talk about some of the tools that will be available for you for doing that analysis. So what is it? What is your recommendation? And this is sort of what I was getting at. Maybe it's better to advocate for a few things more strongly. You really want to be focused. You want to know what you're asking for. And so we tell analysts, it's pretty simple. You're either recommending that this item be funded, that it not be funded, or that it be changed in some way to be adjusted to be funded in a different way. Like I said, we don't have enough revenues to pay for everything. So a lot of the stuff the departments want, the answer ends up being, sorry, there's not enough money to pay for that. So in order to kind of prioritize that, we need to say whether or not we believe something should be funded. Sometimes not enough information is available. If that's the situation, it's important that you understand exactly what it is that you need to know, and you ask those questions. And sometimes you won't get all the information that you need, but if you can't make a recommendation due to lack of information, then it's important to sort of have a list of questions that need to be addressed and figure out how you're going to go about addressing those. So the goal is to make a recommendation. The first step in doing that is, what is a problem that the department is trying to solve? Now, when I think about this, I think about what the department is saying that their problem is. You want to kind of put yourself in their shoes, understand their request. What is it that they're trying to address? Is it that there's a need for a new service in the city? Is there a priority that the mayor or council or department or the public or anybody has sort of put out there as a priority that needs to be addressed? Is there a legal requirement that the department is trying to address through this? Is it just that they're trying to provide the second or third year funding for an ongoing project? There's some reason that they're asking for this money. It's important for you to sort of put that in the frame of what are they trying to do? What are they trying to solve? What is the problem that they're trying to solve? For me, whenever I do analysis, I always start from that point. What is this problem that the department thinks or whoever thinks that they're bringing? Well, what is this thing that we're trying to fix? And then, still in the department shoes, how are they proposing to solve it? Sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but understand if it's, a simple one would be, our problem is that we have really long wait times at 301. The solution is we're going to hire more staff, or maybe the solution is a technology improvement. Maybe the solution is bringing in a contract. But what are the steps that they're proposing, the department is proposing to go through in order to address that problem? How are they going to, what is their proposal? Again, not what should it be, but what is their proposal? And then also as part of this, you want to this is your first look at their resources. And it's not about sort of adjusting or questioning the resources. It's just about checking to see if their math makes sense, right? Because sometimes it doesn't. Everybody makes mistakes. So, so you want to identify and validate their resources they've requested. That's step 2. Step 3 is really where the action is at, okay? And this is when you're conducting your independent analysis. And this is when you get to sort of start taking shots at what the department is requesting. And this is to help you answer the question that you're going to try to in your recommendation is, should the city use resources in order to address this problem? So the first question that I always find myself asking is this actually a problem? Or is this a solution and search for a problem? Do they want to do something but have, is this something that we really need to worry about? If they're saying it's a legal mandate, is it really a legal mandate? Go read the law. Maybe it is. Maybe they're interpreting it wrong. Because a lot of times, if you can't get on the same page with them, what the problem is, the whole thing is going to go sideways. So you really need to do your own assessment of whether or not it's a problem that they're trying to solve. And then, is this a problem that the city should solve? Should the city, for example, get into banking? I don't know. There's a lot of banks out there. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. But we need to ask that question. Is this a problem that the city should be solving, right? It could also just be, is this a problem that rises to the level that it needs to be solved? But it could be, is this an appropriate use of government resources, right? And people will fall in different places on that. But it's important for you to make your own assessment as to whether or not you think that's true, that's the case, and do an evaluation of that based on your own principles of what you think government should be doing. And then, once you've answered those questions, then you can start digging into whether or not this is the right way to solve the problem. So yeah, you think this problem should be solved, but is the department doing it in the smartest way? Should they be adding more staffing? Should it be a technology solution? Should they be contracting out? Should they be insourcing? Well, whatever the solution they're proposing, does this make the most sense the way that they're doing it? And if not, what are the alternatives? How do you suggest that you go about solving this problem? And then, sort of connected to that, are these the right resources? Have they asked for the right number of people if they're asking for people? Or have they asked for, are these the resources that you think need to be used in order to solve the problem? Maybe it's much more. Maybe they've asked for 4 times as much in the expectation that everybody's going to cut whatever they ask for in half. So maybe you need to cut it by 3/4. So then you want to know how much is the solution going to impact the problem, right? If we take these steps, what kind of impact is it going to have? You know, if you're lucky, it's a kind of problem that is easily measurable, and you can look at metrics, and you can sort of say, for this amount of money, this is how far we're going to move the needle on this important matter. But it may not be metrics. It might be quantitative, or qualitative. It might be that the metrics are fuzzy. But you want to try to figure out how much of a change this is going to make, because then it helps you to decide if it's worth the amount that is being proposed to be put into it. And then take a step back. Are other jurisdictions doing the same thing? Is this sort of a best practice? How does this approach compare to how others have tried to solve this same problem? We're a big country. Chances are somebody else has already tried to do this before. The city of LA is not generally on the bleeding edge. There's even a bank in North Dakota. So different situation, but it's out there.
Yank my check.
We had these conversations before you ever wrote about it. Don't worry. So it was, I know.
Yeah.
I'm with you. But look at this stuff. Look at the industry standards. Look at the best practices. Sort of see whether, how are we comparing with this approach? Is this it's been done before, let's look at what's been done and what hasn't worked. And then, so everything is a problem. Like I've said multiple times today, there's a lot of stuff that we would all like to spend money for. There's a lot of services that we would like to improve, but you have to measure them against each other because we don't have money for everything. So where does this fall in the priorities for the city? How important is this compared to other things that the city should be doing, right? Even if it's moving the needle a ton, if it's not the top priority, is it worth spending the money when you need the money for something else? Yeah.
Where are these analyses that are being done? And do you have any examples of these for specific programs? And are they just internal? And are these being done for existing programs, like the existing pavement preservation program? Then an analysis like this that validates the program.
Our office evaluates and prepares a write-up for the mayor's office, has staff at the mayor's office for every request at the department. So yes, the evaluation is being done. It's staff work for the mayor, so no, it's not a public document. Well, I don't know if it's actually technically a public document, but it's not. I think it's staff work, and I think that actually is not a public document. It's not as opposed to sort of it's like an internal staff.
Yeah. But that would be something that mayor's office would want to share with the budget advocates, right? What you think?
That would be a great question to ask. I don't know.
But what if there's something to hide? I mean. Right?
Oh, you're funny.
The CEO provides independent analysis, and the mayor there's no.
It's not that transparent.
Is this the procedure that the CIO uses when they're evaluating city property to be used for homelessness? Because in a part of the city, there is an asset that they want to remove to rebuild another asset. And yet they really haven't evaluated the asset that's taking place there. And the CAO is the one that came up with even a new name. It's called, what is it called? Affordable housing, something else. But do you know the name of it? It's called affordable housing something.
Is this sort of the criteria that we use to determine how assets should be used in the city? Is that, I'm not.
No. Well, anyway, I forgot the name of it. But are they using this analysis format are you sitting with them, with these certain people that go out and decide which sites would be good to create homeless housing?
So obviously I can't speak to specific examples of what other analysts do, their thought process when they go through and do analysis.
No, I'm talking for the CAO's office.
Yeah, if you're talking about for a specific
Because
project that a different analyst in my office has done analysis on, I haven't spoken to them about whatever project it is that you're, so I don't know how they go about doing their own personal analysis. I hope and expect that these are the kind of things that everybody who's involved with policy looks at when they do analysis. And this is sort of the process that we encourage, and everybody in the office is required to have this type of training. And in fact, they've already been doing this for many, many years. So I hope that this is the kind of questions that they ask. But I can't speak to the specific.
But they also don't get published, so we don't put them out.
Well, probably that. Well, I don't know.
No.
Okay.
Connie, the CAO will oftentimes do an analysis that does not necessarily please the mayor or people in the city council. They're very independent about doing it. I think, when you read something from the CAO's office, it's usually well-written, well thought out, and they might say it stinks, but they'll say it in a nice way.
Thank you. That sounds fair. Go ahead.
I just wanted to be specific, because in my neighborhood, it looks like we're getting $6 million for a visual theater. The biggest complaint that I keep hearing is parking. And I'm not sure money's even being allocated. Well, it could be, I'm just not sure. And if I'm not sure, what do I do? Where do I go? How do I get a proposal? We have an ad hoc parking committee, but like, what's my role to get them some answers?
Okay, so the Vision Theater, is that project being administered by the Department of Cultural Affairs? Is that who's sort of over that? Or I know the Councilmember West's office is.
General fund?
Well, general fund, but there's got to be somebody who is sort of managing the project. I mean, generally, the pathway to impact a project would be to find out who it is who's sort of over the project and ask them about that. I don't know if it's cultural affairs or if it's like sort of engineering, sort of doing, I just don't know enough about that particular project to tell you who would be addressing.
It's engineering.
It's engineering.
Is this the theater out in the valley?
Oh, no, it's Owen Hills Basin, Crenshaw.
So engineering may be doing it. I don't know who the and sort of the client
It's engineering?
Engineering is probably managing the building, but I don't know who's sort of the client department.
Let's talk.
Yeah, that's me. Yes.
This is done both for general fund request and enterprise and special funds, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Could you kindly give an example of the third bullet from the bottom? How does this approach compare to best practice, other jurisdictions? How deeply do you?
So I would say this is not something that we look at for everything, obviously, but if there's a new program, we'll look at how other jurisdictions have done the same thing if we haven't done it before. So that would be mostly for, I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings with people who said, what's San Francisco doing? And this, but I'm trying to think of the specific example, and we do it. We do it, I would say, for a certain percentage of projects where it fits to do it. For many of the stuff, it doesn't have it as close to a fit. But if it's something that we don't have any idea because we've never done it before, and it's something that's being done around, we'll look at what other jurisdictions are doing. I mean, I know for IT projects, that's something that we certainly do. If you're going to check to see how other people have, done new payroll systems, we'll go around and look at what other, go actually visit other jurisdictions and check out their systems. So I know we've done it for that type of thing in the past. Body-worn cameras. That's the big one that we did a lot of review of what impacts those had on a variety of factors in other cities and states when we considered whether or not we were going to. I mean, another problem with LA is huge. So if Chicago or New York or Houston hasn't done it, then it's a little bit hard to make a comparison. And body-worn cameras actually fell into that category because it had been done around the country, but it hadn't been done anywhere near the scale that LA is trying So it's a little bit hard to always make it apply, but we looked at it. We looked at it for that. That's an example, a specific example when we did that.
Very well, thank you.
The final bullet point, where's it rank? And how is the department done? What is the department done when you give them the resources in the past? Are they gunners? If you give them, $100,000, did they do what another department would have done with $1 million, or is it the other way around? And we want to know what kind of accomplishments have been made in the past to know whether or not this investment actually makes sense. So this is I think this is where the action is, this is where the fun is, this is where the analysis is, answering the question of should the city use this resource to solve this problem. The final one, and this kind of gets to your question on special funds, is step 4 is identify the funding options, right? So does that be general fund? Can it be special fund? Is there grants that can be used? Are there fees that can support the program? Is it being reimbursed by somebody like a proprietary department or somebody else? Are there other sources of funds? You want to look at what sources of funds would be eligible to be used to sort of fund this request. Just because funds are available, it doesn't mean they should be used, but you still want to know if there's other options for funding, different funding sources that may be more flush. And then if they are saying that there's going to be revenues that are going to back this program or fees, you want to dig in and see if that's true. If it's a brand new fee, do we know for sure? Is it going to be implemented for 12 months? Are they saying there's 12 months of revenues? Is it unlikely that people are going to pay? Are they overstating the amount of use that there's going to be? You want to dig into those revenue estimates because revenues have to equal expenditures. If you get your revenue estimates wrong, you're going to be in trouble the next year when you're trying to implement the budget. You also want to look at whether or not there's going to be future year costs and how those are going to be funded. If it's a multi-year project, is the funding source that you're identifying going to be available for the next several years to pay for this project or not? Are you going to get 2 years in and then just have an empty jail, for example? And then a lot of times departments are asking for new resources for something that they're saying is underfunded. So the question is, how has that been funded in the past? Maybe we just need to shift funds from one place to another. A good example of the time we didn't do that is this year when we spent, last year, we had to put, I forget how much, $30, $40 million towards the police department for their overtime. They had no way of funding that. We ended up having to fund it from reserves. So this year, the council and mayor decided to put money in for police overtime because there really was no other way to do that. But for example, general services always asks for funding for this equipment account, special equipment account that they have. But every year we don't fund it, and somehow they don't have a deficit at the end of the year because they have surpluses elsewhere. So maybe we should shift funds from one place to another, but just because they need more money, it doesn't mean that you need to give them more money. They may have it somewhere else, and you may be able to make that a net zero change. So you may want to right size that. So those are some of the questions you want to ask related to funding options. Okay. And then these are some of the tools that you can look at. So those are the 4 steps, and these are some of the places that you can go to get information. The access to being embedded in meetings with the CEO's office and the mayor. Look at the legislative history. Check out council files. Check out FSRs. Have these issues been discussed in the past? Are there other approaches, other reports that have the right of funding for similar things or for these matters? These are all links, so you can go to them and explore. Check out past budget documents. Look at the 1920 Budget Council file. There's a whole lot of stuff in there. The proposed budgets, letters from departments, budget memos, all this stuff. There's budget memos. All this information about requests that are probably being made again because things tend to come back again and again and again.
Where are the budget memos?
Where are they?
Yeah.
They're right at that link. They're the CEO website.
Okay. So that's every department would be there?
Well, I think they're listed numerically, but yes, all the budget memos that are published.
Yeah, they are listed numerically, and it means you have to scroll down through the list and figure out what departments you want to look at or what issue you want to look at. What I found interesting looking at budget memos is that maybe everyone, or certainly most, have a cover letter from the CAO.
Yes, everyone.
And it's my impression, though I could be wrong, that it's really the department responding and the CAO keeping track. Would that be so?
So, we try to add value. But when we're writing 150 memos over the course of a day, it's a little bit hard to.
Wow.
it's
get them all.
kind of a real hope.
Yeah, I think that we
Yeah,
kind of pick and choose the ones that we really, the ones that have a direct funding impact, we try to have some statement on them, at least saying, you know, this is actually going to have a general fund impact. And maybe that's all that we're saying, but that actually, I hope, says a lot, right? Because sometimes departments are telling you something is free, and we're saying it's going to have a general fund impact. And so they need to understand that if they want to fund this, so they need to either get more revenue from somewhere else or reduce the expenditure somewhere else. So sometimes, you know, we try to, if that's the message, I hope that it's a meaningful message. It's short. Of course, there's your white paper, which we've already talked about. There's a link to it there. A lot of the, you know, it reflects a lot of the budget requests that are made from the department, so you can go and see where your body has landed on those in the past. And of course, our report on your white paper indicating which items have been funded in that year's budget. That's the sort of the list.
Yeah, sorry, just a question. Regarding council files, I find that doing a search by subject matter is problematic, depending on what you're searching for.
Yeah, you have to keyword, yeah.
Yeah, sometimes the keywords work fine, and sometimes it's, and I think it depends on the summary. But do you have any? So when your office is searching,
yes,
doing your historical search or whatever, do you have a better way of doing it?
No, I find it frustrating as well. I mean, I think that the key is to, I mean, the council file number is obviously the easiest way to do it. We have to have some information to be able to even do that. So I would try to search through documents, try to figure out which council files I need to look at if I really wanted to look for something.
Sometimes there's a lot of, so you can have some of these that are, it's like a report back or something.
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of different topics included in the text of what, you know, in the report back.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem like it's pulling up those items, you know what I mean? If it's not.
I agree with you. Yeah, I feel the same way when I search for keywords.
Does the CAO have its own filing system?
Yeah, we file our own reports. We have, if you look at a CAO report, you'll see a different number on there, and they're filed in that way. And I think all those numbers mean something. But, you know, I can see they do. But I can't. It's, you know, it's really just a listing. I don't look for reports. I used to actually go to our little library and I used to count on it. Even for our own reports. It's a paper-based system.
Basically what you guys have is an institutional memory. I mean,
to help us hone in our searches, yeah. I think you get up and ask your neighbor and maybe they'll file for, you have a list of emails or agendas or something. There's, I mean, that's what makes it easier is kind of where to look. I agree when I'm searching Blaine in the council file management system. It's not always fruitful.
Thank you.
And these are things we've already talked about, but these are resources and more links in the back of the presentation. All the budget documents we've talked about are all on one site. City charter, fun reading. The laws we're supposed to be following, and also all the codes, you can find those there. And of course, the budget council file, which is definitely a list of 500 documents. But it's a budget, so if you've got nothing else to do, check it out. You can find it.
One question on that. The budget advocates, try to get neighbor councils to, let's say, generically support the white paper or support it in principle. If they do that, well, here's the council file number for the next year budget doesn't typically seem to get started until like January or February.
Is it that early? Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing I remember seeing is when Councilmember Krikorian puts a motion in to set the public hearing for City Council.
Yeah. Okay. You're right.
So whenever that happens, it's a few months before.
The controller report, revenue report probably goes in there around March 1st, and most of the action is going to be after April 20th.
My question is there any way, short of maybe having Krikorian do something, is there any way that we could, just trying to think ahead here, if we got our white paper done before, say, Krikorian's initial motion.
Yeah.
And we wanted to be in that council file, which would be 20-0600.
Yes.
Is there any way that that can happen, short of city councilman? And does your office have any influence on that?
So your white paper generally makes its way onto the council file because of our report, or does it get there on its own? I don't know how the clerk posts
I think
it. I mean, if clerk would post it, it would go, that would be the first
I
document
think
file.
it goes when we officially transmit it to the Budget and Finance Committee.
Yeah.
It just that this year and
But I
projected for next year,
Yeah.
we're hoping to have it out very beginning of January.
I believe if that's the case, then it would be, they would open the file for that purpose. I would expect that they would.
So the 20-0600?
Yeah, and where else would they put it, right? That's what it's for.
That would be the city clerk's office.
Yes.
And perhaps there could be some kind of call to the city clerk's office.
Absolutely, yeah, you can work with that. Let them know this should be the first, maybe if there's not a file yet, that should be where this is the file that should go on.
That's the first thing neighbor councils ask us. Where do we do our community impact statement?
Yeah.
And we say, oh, well, the file doesn't exist yet. So if that's up to us if we're the first out, first in,
Yeah.
and we got to do that to get that file done so the neighbor council can do that.
I would think even if they filed the statement, they might put it on that file. I mean, it's a budget file. If it's a request for the 2020 budget, that's where else would they put it, right? It has to go. I don't know how community impact statements work, sorry, but I would expect that if a document came in commenting on the 2020 budget process and it was the first thing in, that they would open the file.
We'll have to try that.
Yeah, see what happens. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
I have a question. Yours says that they're going to do a change of zoning code that means residential, commercial, or industrial.
So you would think you had it. This is you check.
Oh, wait, this is last time. Okay. Oh, I gotta get.
What, a variance?
Thank you, Jacob.
Okay.